Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So glad you joined us. The webinar has the title Memory at Risk in Countries of the Former Soviet Union, Protecting Archives from Destruction in Times of Conflict. Why did we choose this title? Archives, documentation, and memory. Oftentimes they are documenting violations of human rights and breaches of international humanitarian law. They are critical in peace-building processes and in dealing with the past processes. Information plays a very key role in these processes. It is also a central pillar that allows a society to acknowledge wrongdoings, to commemorate those who are gone or missing, and also to open spaces for dialogue and reconciliation. Because then the information and documentation is so important, archives are, however, oftentimes also at risk of destruction. This is worldwide, but also in countries of the former Soviet Union. These risks can be due to various reasons, for example, political pressure, war, neglect, and also natural disasters. This is also the case in countries of the former Soviet Union, so we titled the webinar Memory at Risk. One way to deal with this risk that archives are facing is placing a security copy in a safe haven abroad. However, a number of challenges are going along with such a safe haven agreement for archives at risk. These can be related to ethical questions, to access to legal questions, and many more. This is also the reason why the initiative Safe Haven for Archives at Risk was established in 2016. The main goal of this initiative is to promote these arrangements, safe haven arrangements, that comply with good practice standards and deal with the ethical and practical challenges that come with these cases. And since its launch in 2016, the initiative Safe Havens for Archives at Risk was translated to 6 languages, English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and since very recently also to Russian and Ukrainian. And with these newly translated versions to Russian and Ukrainian, we hope that the initiative will be able to serve more also in the countries of the former Soviet Union and in the post-Soviet space in general. Of course, the time currently with the war in Ukraine and conflicts in other parts of the region as well, and also with the shrinking space for civil society, which we are currently experiencing in the region, there is a growing demand of civil society organizations to protect their archives. And this is precisely what the Safe Haven initiative aims to do, to support civil society organizations and other stakeholders on the ground that may need guidance and advice to safely preserve their archives. And the webinar today, thank you again so much for joining, is to launch officially the initiative in Russian. So we are hoping through this webinar and through this initiative to increase awareness about the Safe Havens initiatives among civil society organizations in the post-Soviet region. We also want to present to you the different resources which are available and to highlight the importance of documentation for future dealing with the past processes. And we came here together to discuss the challenges in finding safe havens for archives at risk, and also to potentially identify solutions to address the risks of archives in unstable times. Maybe to quickly introduce myself, my name is Esther Wiesmann. I am a program officer in the swisspeace dealing with the past team, and I'm very happy that I'm joined today by 3 experts on archives from the region, from the post-Soviet region, and also from outside the region. Welcomes especially to those 3 experts. We have Trudy Haskamp-Petersen. She's an archival expert and member of the advisory committee on the initiative on safe havens for archives at risk. We have Alexei Makarov, who is an archivist with International Memorial. And we have Margarita Akflediani with us, who is a program director at Go Group Media, Jam News, and is based in Tbilisi, Georgia. I will introduce those 3 panel members more in depth later on, but for now I want to thank you already for joining and being here with us today, and also for sharing your experiences. We are really looking forward to that. I also want to thank the International Council on Archives, who are supporting this event through the Program Commission. So before we will hear from our experts and also their experiences, I quickly want to introduce everyone to the website of the initiative and also the key resources which have been translated to Russian. So I will now start screen sharing, and I would be very glad if someone could confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so here you can see the Safe Havens for Archives at Risk website. I will choose the Russian version, of course, for now, since we are launching it today. Please feel free to choose the language up here, whichever you are most comfortable with. So here we are on the starting page. The starting page is just very briefly presenting the initiative, what is its goal, and also we have the link already to the guiding principles for safe havens for archives at risk. The guiding principles are part of the core of the initiative, and they have been elaborated by the initiative and are providing guidelines of the ethical and legal standards and challenges that should be that can be used while placing an archive in a safe haven or while considering placing an archive in a safe haven. And our expert Trudy will then go with us through the guiding principles later on. So we will move on. Here you can see the build-up of the website. It is mainly built in 4 key parts. We will go to the first part, which is giving us more background also about the initiative. Here you can see some background information. Also, how it was developed. And you can also read some testimonials of hosting institutions and also other partners at the very bottom of the page right here. There is also a link to our flyer, which is just a very brief and 1-page capturing of the initiative as a whole. Moving on to the site on the guiding principles. As I mentioned, these are consisting of 18 guiding principles that are supposed to guide the protection of archives at risk. They have been developed by the International Working Group. And as I mentioned, they are a set of legal and ethical standards that the Safe Haven Agreement should adhere to. These guidelines, these guiding principles have been endorsed by the ICA, the International Council on Archives, in 2018, and by the Latin American Association of Archivists in 2019. And we will hear more about them from Trudy later on. I just want to point out that they can be downloaded in 6 languages. So we have also newly added the Russian and the Ukrainian version. Scrolling down, we have the commentary to the guiding principles. This is just a more in-depth elaboration on and explanation of each of the principles. And for now, it is available in English, so also feel free to download this one. Another resource that is part of the initiative is the generic agreement, which can also be downloaded in the 6 languages, including Russian and Ukrainian. This is a model agreement with the aim to support sending and hosting institutions and coming to a safe havens agreement. moving on, we have a site talking more about who is behind this initiative. As I mentioned, the initiative has been developed by an ad hoc working group in 2016. And in 2019, this working group has then been transformed into an advisory committee for safe havens for archives at risk. And this advisory committee consists of international institutions, government institutions, non-governmental institutions, and also individual experts. Swisspeace, our role in this is to act as the secretariat. So swisspeace is acting as the secretariat for the initiative. Moving on to the next page on resources. Here you can find just a collection of articles about the initiative, what has happened in the past, about workshops, about publications related to the initiatives, expert meetings, all types of different resources. So please also scroll through here and learn more about the background and the aim of the resources. A very key part of the initiative is of course that there is the possibility to connect with us. So if you are working in an organization and you feel that one of your archives is potentially at risk, please don't hesitate to reach out. Swisspeace will receive your request as the secretariat of the initiative, and it will be answered as quickly as possible and in complete confidentiality. Before forwarding any information, the secretariat will reach back out to you to confirm and to request your approval to seek further advice from the advisory committee, for example. Yes, so please feel free to contact us. My colleague Aline will also put the link to the website in the chat box, as well as the contact address, should you seek to receive further answers or advice. This was a very brief overview of the website and the available resources. And after the panel discussion, we will have a Q&A session. So if at this point you should have questions related to the website, please also post them in the chat box and we will take them up at the end. Now I would like to open the floor for our experts' inputs during the panel discussion. I think we have all been waiting for them. As I mentioned, we have 3 experts with us today. A quick presentation. We have Trudy Haskamp-Peterson. She's an archival expert, has worked many years with the National Archives and has started her own archival consulting company since 2002. And she has worked with truth commissions in South Africa and Honduras, Special Court for Sierra Leone, the Marshall Islands, and also in Guatemala. And she also served as the director of archives and record management for the UN and the High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva. She was vice president of the ICA and vice chair of its Commission on Program Support. And she was very key in funding in the foundation of this Safe Havens for Archives at Risk initiative, and also serves on the advisory committee today. Thank you so much for joining, Trudy. I would like to hand over to you for giving us the background, this initiative further.
Thank you very much, Esther. And let me say how pleased I am to be here this morning. I know it's afternoon where most of you are. It's morning where I am, to talk about the Safe Havens initiative. As Esther said, we did begin this initiative a number of years ago, but it was incredibly important that the government of Switzerland in 2013 had amended their law on cultural property to say that there was going to be a legal authority to indeed take in the records of institutions and organizations that were at risk. Esther, how do I move this? There we go. Okay. And so out of that, Switzerland started to say, well, what does it mean to be a safe haven? And how do we understand what temporary storage of archives would mean? And so they hosted an international expert working meeting. And out of that came a discussion of what are the real risks. And Esther, can you move it for me? There we go. And we identified 4 kinds of risks: war and invasion, armed conflict, civil unrest and insurgency, which is not quite war, but is terribly damaging to archives, repressive regimes, and of course, climate change. Out of those, we then decided next to have a working group which drafted guiding principles. And those are what I will talk about this morning. swisspeace facilitated the development. There was a public comment period in 2018. And as Esther said, the International Council on Archives endorsed these guiding principles in October of 2018. Next. So who's the audience? Well, principally it's everybody, but in particular, it's people who are concerned with archives potentially relevant for dealing with the past that they believe are at risk. And then, of course, those interested in safe haven solutions, either as a sending or a hosting institution. I did use the word institution there, but it's important to say that you don't have to be an organization that is a non-governmental institution. It can also be a part of a government that is concerned, as was the Human Rights Ombudsman in Guatemala, who sought a safe haven for part of the police archives of Guatemala. And it can also be an individual who has, for example, a photographer who's been photographing in a conflict zone and is worried about what's going to happen to his images. So we say institution, but we really do mean anyone who's holding material that they believe is at risk. So the principles were grouped into 4 pieces. General principles, then what does the agreement between the parties look like? What characteristics should an institution that is going to host archives at risk do? And then what do we do if time is absolutely of the essence and we need to get material out and very quickly? So I'm going to run through each of these. Know 2 things about it. One, there's a headline, which is all I will mention. And then there is a brief description of what that headline means. We knew as soon as we finished the principles that this was not enough, that we needed some commentary behind that. The document that is commentary on the principles has yet to be translated out of English. But if you are able to read the English, do that, because it will give you a much fuller sense of what we're trying to say in the principles. So let's go through the principles very quickly. First, safe haven solution should always be implemented if the archives and records are at risk. So this is the basic deal with the past principle. Next. But it is a last resort to take them out of the country. If at all possible, safe haven should be done within the country. If you can move them to a different location where they may be safer. But if it's impossible, then as a last resort, outside the country of origin. Next. The host institution should make sure that they're transparent when they take the records in and make them available. Next. Any safe haven agreement should be in a written bilateral agreement. That's why we developed the model agreement. Next. Next. The main goal then is to say that the goal of the sending institution is controlling, is not how they're treated by the hosting institution that controls. It is what the sending institution wants. Next. And the hosting institution should have an ethical code. Next. Do no harm, be sensitive to the conflict, and protect the right to privacy. Next. It should be a fair agreement. We know that a sending institution is going to be in the position of asking. It's going to be an asymmetrical and uneven relationship. We understand that. And this says the agreement should be fair to both parties. Next. The host institution should not profit. For example, the host institution should not make money by selling photographs that come in the material that's transferred. Next. Then we go to what does the agreement look like? This is the second big part. The agreement should define the roles and procedures. Next. And technical standards. How is this institution going to handle the scanned images that it gets? Next. Ownership. The hosting institution holds the material, but does not own them. The sending institution owns them. Next. This includes the obligation to return the records to country of origin if requested. Next. You have to specify how long. We know it's difficult to do this. We don't know how long conflicts are going to last. But with an option for extension and closure, it means that you come back, say, every 5 years and say, is this still the agreement we want? Is this the way we want it to work? Next. Next. And then we have to think about what happens if the sending institution or the hosting institution changes. And we know this happens. We know some sending institutions go out of existence. We know some hosting institutions are, say, moved within a government structure. And so you have to agree, what are you going to do in those cases? Next. And then it's the spirit of the agreement should be guiding no matter what date we're talking about. Next. Okay, so what are the characteristics we're looking for in institutions that are hosts? First of all, an institution that is embedded in a legal system that respects the rule of law. Next. Next. They should have good facilities for managing the materials and preserving them, and should have direct control. In other words, they don't take in a body of scanned documents and then farm it out to a contractor, unless they tell the sending institution that's what they're going to do. Next. Physical characteristics has to be in a good, safe building with appropriate security. Next. And should have work in accordance with internationally recognized professional standards. The International Council on Archives has a code of ethics. There are some principles for working with materials that have a human rights implication. These are the kind of professional standards we're looking toward. And finally, next, if there is a need for rapid response, still, we want the agreement to be guided by the spirit of the principles. Next. and as soon as possible, go back and actually do an agreement along with the principles outlined here, but get the material safe and get it stored in a way that you are sure the hosting institution will be able to take care of it. So that's the principles. Now, a quick look at a couple of things of where we are right now. Next. It does three things. It facilitates the contact between the institution holding and a suitable hosting institution. It's a matchmaking, if you will. Secondly, the initiative will provide guidance or specialized advice concerning how safe haven solutions can work. And third, the initiative will contribute, if asked, to policy level questions being debated within sending or hosting institutions that relate to the Safe Havens project. Next. What we have, as Esther has already said, are a variety of documents that show how the organization works. Next. swisspeace serves as a central information point, and here is indeed the Secretariat number again, the Secretariat email link again, and the fact that support through swisspeace and its wonderful language capabilities can provide support in 6 languages: Arabic, English, French, Spanish, Russian, and Ukrainian. Thank you very much. I turn it back to Esther.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trudy, for giving us the background of this initiative and also going with us through the 18 guiding principles. Next, I would like to invite Alexei Makarov to the floor. We are very happy that Alexei is joining us today. As I mentioned, he is an archivist at International Memorial, and this is also the time where I would like to wholeheartedly congratulate Memorial on the recognition by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee they have received earlier this year. Alexei, we are very happy that you could make the time to discuss this initiative with us today. Alexei is a historian, and he is engaged in the history of human rights movement in the former USSR and also in Russia. In 2016 to 2022, he was a member of the board of the Memorial Human Rights Center as well. And he will do his presentation in Russian. So please, if you would like to listen to it in English, you will have to switch away from the main channel and also choose the English channel in the interpretation function below. If you would like to listen to it in Russian, you will have to switch to the main channel and move away from the Russian translation channel. Thank you very much, and over to you, Alexei. Thank you for joining us.
Добрый вечер, уважаемые.
Good evening, dear colleagues, dear participants. I'm very happy to participate in this webinar. I think it's a very important topic. First of all, thank you for congratulating us on getting the Nobel Peace Prize. I would like to remind you that 3 organizations were awarded. All of them document human rights violations. We share the Nobel Prize with Ales Bilansky from Vyasna Human Rights Center, who is imprisoned now, and also Civil Liberty Center from Ukraine, who were also awarded Peace Prize. They are documenting currently mass severe human rights violations during the armed conflict that is taking place currently. I am representing Memorial, that was established at the end of the 80s during the existence of the Soviet Union. And it has existed for over 30 years. So we document both history of the Soviet political regime and human rights violations by the Soviet government, but we also document partially human rights violations by the Nazi regime. First of all, the case of so-called gastarbeiters, so local population from Eastern Europe that were forced to move to Germany for work as forced laborers. We are also a human rights organization. During the last 30 years, we specialized in so-called hot armed conflicts in the post-Soviet countries like Nagorno-Karabakh, Ossetia and Ingushetia conflict, Tajikistan, Transnistria, both wars in Chechnya, etc. So we've collected documents from three political regimes, Soviet, Nazi, and the Russian ones. But the work of human rights organizations often includes monitoring human rights violations in other countries. And that is why archives of such organizations can contain also materials describing human rights violations by some other political regimes. Human rights are not national ones, they're international in their nature. And such documents give the voice to individuals and human rights movements and to third sector representatives from those countries where those voices cannot be heard, or where authorities are not interested in historic memory or interested too much in silencing those voices. For example, in 2022, two organizations belonging to Memorial Group were closed on the basis of one of the Russian courts. When we deal with archives at risk, for example, our memorial archive is at risk currently. There are some challenges, and I would like to share our experience and the challenges that we've been facing trying to preserve our archives. First of all, when we talk about safekeeping, there's an ethical issue. Should we take the account of the founders taken into account? Sometimes people gave us unique documents from their family archives for keeping. They would like those archives to be preserved in the country, or they want to preserve them at any cost, among others, by transporting them abroad. So when archive is at risk, we need to remember that there are two categories of documents. First, these are paper documents, and secondly, these are electronic documents. Electronic archives, well, it's simpler to the situation is simpler. So yes, you can come to certain arrangements and, for example, place those documents on international servers. Of course, you need to have backups on hard drives and, for example, also download documents on protected clouds. But this doesn't solve the issue of protecting paper documents. For example, when archive is at risk or potentially can be at risk, there's a need to assess, to evaluate what is the greatest risk in a particular state. What should be preserved, first of all? These are not necessarily personal, individual data, but sometimes these are various groups of documents. For example, in Russia, there's a federal list of extremist materials, and dissemination of such materials can lead to penal charges. For example, if you study the rights of groups that have been proclaimed extremists, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses have been proclaimed extremists. So, for example, if you keep such materials at home, then you are in danger, basically. Well, what about copies? Well, when we think about copies, we should also remember about physical conditions. Yes, we need them. We need to move them to a safe place, but that should be a place, for example, with the right temperature regime and right humidity. So why do we need to preserve such archives? Why are they important? How can we use them in the future? Both activists and organizations and journalists have documented and keep documenting human rights violations. They actually identify perpetrators, and like in case of war, actually, we talk about crimes against humanity, and those documents are not limited by any time limits because they can be used even 10 or 20 or 30 years later. So now they cannot be used, for example, but later, actually, international tribunals, for example, will be able to use them. So such archives in the future will be priceless. Also, if we talk about political regimes and about collaborators, if they are the perpetrators, they all have the past, colorful past. I'll give an example. The head of the Supreme Court of Russia, Mr. Vyacheslav Lebedev, who actually was the author of several political decisions in 2000s. He actually was a judge during the Soviet time, and he actually was the author of 3 decisions connected to human rights. So such archives help us to reconstruct a biography of a person. And for example, in the future, when we'll deal with the past, it would be clear. Like, for example, if anyone would like to build a monument or, for example, a memorial plaque dedicated to someone, then actually we would be able to have a look at the preserved documents and see who that person really was, whether that person deserves to be commemorated or not. Also, sometimes war conflicts, armed conflicts, prolong in the time. They become very long-lasting ones. And for example, each of the parties tries to write their own history, but the future cannot be built on lies, on propaganda, and on myths. In order to really understand what happened in the past, we need the archives of non-governmental organizations, because they collect the documents that the government does not want to preserve, especially in case of dictatorships. I think that's what I wanted to say. I'd like also to leave some time for questions and answers afterwards. Thank you very much for your attention.
Спасибо большое, Alexei. Thank you so much, Alexei, for your input and for sharing your experience working with those archives with us today. This was very interesting, and I'm sure that people will have questions, and which we will address after we have heard from our next panelist. So at this point, I would like to invite Margherita Agvildiani to the floor. Margherita is the program director at Go Group Media and the editor-in-chief for Jam News Media outlet, and both are working in the Caucasus. She's also a media trainer, an acclaimed media trainer, and a participant in a number of informal diplomacy interventions related to the conflicts in the Caucasus region. She has also worked on establishing archives in the region, and thank you very much, Rita, for joining us today and also for sharing your experience with us. Over to you, Rita. Rita will present in English, so please remember to move to the correct channel so that you can hear the translation. Thank you. Over to you, Rita.
Hello, it's very nice to be here today, and thank you for inviting. I am a journalist, as it was said, and working in the region for all those 30 years that it's overwhelmed by several conflicts. And the Caucasus, it means 3 countries, 3 disputed areas, and endless wars starting from early 90s. But so being a journalist, I deal with it as a journalist, as a war reporter as well during so many years. But during last about 10 years, I am involved in very interesting initiative, which has nothing to do with journalism, but it's archiving of the war. One of the wars happened in the Caucasus in early 90s. It's the Georgian-Abkhaz War. And Abkhazia is considered by Georgia and most international society to be part of Georgia, but Abkhazia itself, also supported by Russia and a few other countries, they consider it to be independent state. And the bloody war happened in early 90s, and then there was war in 2008, but it was wasn't directly connected to Abkhazia, but actually touched a lot in the area as well. But what we decided to do with with colleagues from Georgian side and from Abkhaz side, it is to somehow document the war that happened in early 90s, because real history doesn't exist that we can touch to or teach to in the schools, or provide a book to read about, or to have maybe series about it or anything. It just doesn't exist. No textbooks really touching the issue, but some propaganda chapters in the history textbooks for pupils in the schools or at the university. Some reconciliations, what people recall about the events, but history doesn't exist. And so the idea was that it's time for us, actually it was time long ago, but at least to do it now and try to collect in one place, together in one place, the documents, photographs, and also to record via video or audio, mostly video, those who were directly in charge back to early 90s when the war started, and also those who eyewitnessed it, who was really eyewitnessing, either being a part of the events, those tragic, or just having direct connection to some maybe structures working for them. And we have recorded so far more than 300 video interviews with politicians who were in charge and being really those who made the history in that period of time. Also people living in the area. And some of them, so as I said, we do it for almost 10 years already. And it's two parallel processes from Abkhaz side and from Georgia's side. So two teams work on the gathering the archive, including gathering the documents and photographs that we can find and search and talk to people and trying to get from them the materials if they agree, or at least to provide the copies. But first of all, we are recording people, and because some people already died and we had time to record their memories. Some of them moved, some of them changed their memories because it happens so often to people. And it was important to start to launch this process actually back to the 90s, but at least 10 years ago, it was already time that some people already would share a different story today than they did it 10 years ago. So it's already a huge archive, so we do understand that it will be a job for new generation to come, because the idea is to collect maybe, I don't know, 100,000 or whatever memories that will create that vivid archive that can become a base for future researchers or teachers, that new curriculums would be created. And at least it's very, very timid aim that we put it in front of us. It's just to save whatever we can from all the sides possible, from all the points of view possible. And then let's see how it happens in time and how it will work for future generations, for our kids at least. The problem with saving the archive, it's very vivid for us, because we have like server and physical archive as well, but also those recordings at least and copies of the documents, they are saved in digital format. And it's also exactly what was mentioned, those threats that they exist in the region just every day. You know that the recent war happened in 2020, and right now between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's very hot period of time, and any war can happen anytime in the region. So being under threat of unrests, of new wars, also of maybe police searches, maybe not in Tbilisi, but in Sukhumi, in Abkhazia, it's very vivid threat. So it's definitely big headache for us, that it's one thing to collect it, and we work carefully on it so many years, but another thing how to save it, and it's an open question. So we discuss the team, we discuss it with, already tried to discuss with some universities in the West, but the question is not yet fully decided. So it's very important to look into it and to see how it would happen further. So let me maybe stop for now, and if there are questions, I will be happy to share more information.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you very much for telling us more about what you are working on in the Caucasus region. This is so relevant and very interesting, related also to this initiative on Safe Haven for Archives at Risk. Yes, once again, thanks to all three panelists, to Trudy, to Alexei, and to Margarita. At this point, we would dive into our Q&A part. So please, if you have a question to one of our three panelists or to several ones, you may raise your hand and we can unmute you, or alternatively, please post them in the chat box. Of course, also from my side, I do have several questions. So maybe I can start with one of my questions. Or is there a question in the chat box? Okay, so the first question I wanted to ask to our two panelists who are sharing their experiences from the ground, Alexei and Margarita. Yeah, you have both told us about your work with archives and also some of the challenges you are facing, but also more directly related to the initiative. Can you maybe give us also concrete examples of risks that your archives are facing, and then connected to this, what are the main challenges in safeguarding your archives? And if you want to connect it, you can also connect it to the question of would you store your archive in a safe haven? Rita, you have touched upon it a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate. And under what conditions would you store your archives in a safe haven?
So let's say, if you let me. So actually, it's when we talk about between the teams and within the team, we talk about the threats. We always consider future ones, because so far, at least in the field, in Georgian Abkhaz field, in this field, at least it didn't happen before that somebody would come with searches and would somehow try to seize equipment or anything. It's just about to be prepared, because the situation is very unstable, including that Abkhazia is very much under control of Russia, and Russia is in very unstable situation currently because of the war in Ukraine and international sanctions. So it's really looking not like something immediate happening to the archive, but just looking into some possibilities and that can happen. It is what we worry about. And the question is, as Alexei said, also about physical thing, because there are physically like newspapers, like piles of them. And not only we have dozens of thousands of copies that we did from some other archives or from different libraries and from archives that people have, but they don't want physically, but agree that we would make photos of them. And it's easier with them because clouds could be used, or some other opportunities of server itself. But for physical, especially documents and rare of them, it's a question what to do with them. But it's also about, because the archive is currently closed and it will remain closed for the general public. It's an agreement between the sites that we would work currently on the collecting the items, because it's, as I said, that first of all, we need not to lose time, not to waste time, but to collect as much information as we can right now until it disappeared, including people's. But what to do further with it? So those recordings, they can be copied, but where to save them? And also it's a real thing also with photos. So it's open question. We don't know what to do. So probably After the session is over, probably I will talk to my colleagues and will share with them that there is such an opportunity, and maybe we have to elaborate further about the issue with you.
Да, я тоже попытаюсь
Yes, I will try to answer the question. There are many risks. For example, the risk of liquidation of our organization. For example, if we have an archive, so does it belong legally to an organization? Like, is it mentioned as an asset? If it's an official asset, it may be a risk when the organization is liquidated, because it may not have time to move it to some other organization. If it's not listed as an asset, well, you have documents physically, but how can you prove that they belong you legally? So that's an issue, potentially. As regards potential movement abroad for temporary keeping, well, yes, still there are some problematic issues. First, the size, the number of documents. For example, Memorial's archive, there are thousands of archive boxes. Also, whether the country will perceive those materials as important and precious. For example, if you talk about museum collectible items, then actually you cannot take a picture outside the country, because if you take it without a consent of the Ministry of Culture, it's illegal. But the procedure of getting the consent is very lengthy, and actually you may not get the permission to take the picture out of the country. So I guess these are the main issues that we deal with when we are trying to move the things out of the country. But the moment of the movement itself may be problematic, because when you start moving the archive, authorities may try to confiscate them. What are other risks that Memorial is currently facing? Well, for example, yes, where to keep those documents. Well, there was a court decision at the end. There was a court decision, and at the end of January 2023, our main building will be confiscated by the authorities. So I guess, yes, these are the main challenges and risks that we are facing.
Thank you both, Margarita and Alexei, for sharing those risks related to your archives. We do understand there are many risks currently in this region, of course. And I was wondering if you can, I mean, Rita, you mentioned that your archive is closed at the moment, but Alexei, could you maybe talk a bit more about access to your archives, and what main challenges do you see related to access more specifically?
Yes, of course. Well, we have different funds. Partially, our archives have been digitalized, and we keep doing that. So, for example, when researchers send a request, they can get an access to digitalized materials. What about non-digital materials? The Access is possible, but not in a real professional way. It's possible to make pictures of those documents and send them to researchers. Well, some documents are confidential ones. This is a complicated process if you need to provide access to confidential documents. Sometimes there's a personal data or some health data. That's why the access is limited. Sometimes we want people to treat the documents very carefully. So sometimes we refuse access if we are concerned that, for example, someone would use the documents to compromise the author, of the documents, for example, when they'll try to compromise, or get some negative information about the person who is described in the documents. So now we are trying to develop a procedure for providing access to various types of documents. For example, one of the possible solutions is a consultation with the experts, with employees of certain organizations that understand better than we activists what sensitive information really is. So, for example, we need expert opinion on what sensitive information should not be provided to researchers. So it's kind of difficult to formulate a clear policy describing how access should be provided to different parts of our archives.
Thank you, Alexei. And of course, we do understand that there is also various documents in your thousands of boxes that Memorial currently holds. So I would like to bring in our expert Trudy also. Trudy, maybe you can, and I see there is a raised hand, so just after this we will take the question from the floor. But Trudy, maybe you can just answer to the challenges that have been raised by our two organizations on the ground, and sharing also your experience with storing documentation in a safe haven abroad, and maybe how to answer to some of these challenges. Over to you.
Thank you. The challenges obviously are real. We all understand that. And let me highlight 2 or 3 of the things we need in the Safe Havens program, and then let me come back to a couple of specifics. First of all, the Safe Havens program routinely is asked for support for digitization, money. And the Safe Havens program at the moment has very limited means to be able to support that. We're looking at trying to figure out some resources, but we don't have a big chunk of money we can give someone to digitize material that is not already in electronic form. We also need, as you've both said, support for transport of materials. And we know how difficult it is, and we know how politically charged it is. And it's another of the big issues. If you're trying to take materials out of the country, not only do you have to deal with the government structures, as Alexei has just said with the Ministry of Culture, but you simply have to figure out how to do the transport safely. And that's not easy. We also need very much additional hosting institutions who are willing to take this on. And here, let me go to a couple examples. Some hosting institutions only wish to take government records. And so we've placed government records with those institutions. Other places don't take government records or prefer to take records from non-governmental sources. We have people who will take audiovisual material, but don't take paper. People who will take electronics, but won't take paper. We also have situations in which an institution, and here I'll talk a little bit about the Marshall Islands records of the Nuclear Claims Tribunal that are in the Swiss Federal Archives. And that was an agreement that some of the materials could be made publicly available through the Swiss government, through the Swiss Federal Archives. In other cases, such as a body of records from the Middle East that was deposited in the National Archives of Finland, it's absolutely closed. It's not available to the public in any way. And so it depends upon the agreement. Do you want it made public? Do you not? Do you want it made public in part or in whole? And do you have a mixed media? And if so, we've got to find a hosting institution that will take mixed media. Is it all electronic? If so, it's a lot easier. So those are all some of the issues that as we move forward, this program will deal with. One thing on access, there is an International Council on Archives Principles on Access to Archives, as you probably know. It doesn't directly look at archives at risk. It really is looking at archives in a more stable setting. And again, it's something that I think is worth taking a second look at and seeing if there is an addendum to it that needs to be done, or whether just interpreting it wisely gets us to where we need to be. Now let's go to the public hand there that is waving away.
Thank you, Trudy. Over to you, Nikita Lomaki. Please unmute. Yeah.
Hello. So I have a question to Margarita about digital preservation of the interviews. And so do you preserve it by your own institution, in your own institutions, or do you give it to some other institution? And while giving, for example, to other institution, do you consider the question of gaining the rights of publication, which, for example, can be made by your institution or not? So how do you deal with digital preservation of the interviews? I think it's an important question for also for Memorial Archive. So maybe.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really important question for us as well. We can't open the archive so far and probably won't for several years because it's agreement between sides not to do, just related to some political issues. And preservation is, it's not one organization, Go Group Media, that I represent working on the archive from Georgian side. It's a group of organizations. So there are a number of, not so many, but few organizations and people as well that participate in this big program. So each of us, we are doing separate parts of it. Like my group team, for instance, is fully responsible for video and audio recordings of eyewitnesses and key figures of that period of time. And so it's so far it's agreement between several organizations that we together own the archive. But the question remains what Alexei mentioned as well. What happens next? So what happens tomorrow? Like if Go Group Media disappears or doesn't exist, or other people would come to lead it. to own it, and they maybe are not interested in continuing the work or doing it separately somehow. So it's open question, and it's very difficult to resolve, because it's definitely the work that we are willing to do. It's not like somebody would oblige us, and it's separately for any administrative or structures or anything. So it just number of people that would like to do it for future generations. And then it's difficult to predict what is going to happen when people change or die or leave or whatever happens. And about how to present it to the public and whether maybe some rights to publish or anything. So when we, at least when it comes to the interview video or audio to the person, so we always have consent form, and it's huge one. It's like almost 2 pages. You know probably what is it. So people have to sign to fill into several parts of it, and also there is a question whether you agree that it will be made public, and if yes, then whether you agree that it will be made public right now and whatever time, or you have your conditions. And so using particular interviews anyway, even if the archive is open, will be possible only following those ticks that the person did in the consent form. But what we did, we 2 years ago, we for the first time tried to, from Georgian side, we tried to present the archive to the public, and we conducted an public exhibition. So it was for a month in Tbilisi. It was opened for wide public, and we presented there pretty many documents, including unique and photographs. But what was especially unique and new for the public, so we did huge job, because we have, as I said, we have about 300 recorded interviews so far, and then some of them are 5 hours long. So it's not journalistic, it's archive. And so it's huge. And what we did, we tried, of course, first we connected to the person that gave interview, and we did very short pieces, some 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And we did many of them, those small pieces, talking about one particular issue that would be interesting for wider public. And it took us probably 2 months to agree each of the parts with each of the authors or relatives, because in 2 cases the person already died. And then we presented those interviews as well using iPads at the exhibition, and it was of huge interest of the public. So, and it's absolutely unique stories that people never heard about, and many those respondents who provided us interviews, they were sharing their view on the past events they were part of, or they created they were ministers that time or something. That is completely the opposite what public today would believe into, because it's sometimes it was much more thoughtful discussion or like recalling of the events than current generation would think about. Sometimes it was vice versa, but it provoked big discussion within society, this exhibition. So me personally, I would look forward that to somehow at least partly open the archive, but currently no rights for anybody to use even 5 seconds from any recording, but those that we used during the exhibition, and they also were not for publishing it online, for instance. So it was forbidden to somehow to copy them from the exhibition or to use them. So just watch until you can during those 30 days, and that's it so far. But we look forward, we look for those who come, maybe not after us, like maybe it's not like 20, 30 years ahead, but at least for those who are at schools now or students, that we do it for them.
But just may I come back to the beginning? So about the preservation of digital copies, where do you hold it? So do you hold it on your hard drives or in
Server.
cloud, or do you like, how does it work? Do you think that you should give it to some other institution in order to make digital preservation in other ways? So that's the question.
We should. It's a server. It's server, and where everything is saved, and also it's tagged. So because it's at the same time it's video, audio, and documents and newspapers or anything. So all the materials, they are tagged, and it's possible to search. So it's pretty well developed program, and it's server. So they're saved there, all the materials. And we are, as I said, we are in discussion where to save it, because server, it's so easy just to pick up and to bring with yourself or to destroy or whatever. So it's definitely, it's open question, which is burning, which is we are about to decide right away.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you, Rita. Alexa, did you also want to come in on that, or you are okay for the moment? You are also.
Я хотел добавить,
I would like to add just a small comment to the last answer to the question. I think another important function of such archives is preserving the memory about reaction of civil society to certain events, because when many years pass, sometimes people disagree. For example, they say no one was against this or that conflict, or this or that party voted for this and that, or made this and that statement. So I think such archives has this type of very important function. Well, when Margarita mentioned interviews with key figures in the previous events, then I remembered about this important function.
Yes, thank you so much for this addition, Alexa. It is very important addition also for the use of documentation also in the future and in long-term processes, and the role that civil society is playing in it. And we are almost at the end of this discussion. It has been so interesting. Thank you to everyone for participating, and to our three panelists especially. Are there more questions from the public? I don't see any. So at this point, I would just like to ask all three of our participants to say a few closing words. Maybe you can link it to the initiative. So maybe why and how do you think the Safe Havens initiative is useful, specifically also in the countries of the former Soviet Union? Over to you. Maybe we can start with you, since she was the last one to speak, and then over to Alexei and Margarita as well.
Thank you. It has been a very interesting discussion, raised important issues. I think it's one of the things we need most is to spread the word, to tell people that this option is possible, and that swisspeace is able to provide some sort of connecting services to people who can help with preservation of archives at risk. I'm concerned that we have conflicts in so many parts of the world, and we have no way to tell people in those areas that there is this option. And so we all need to make sure we tell as many people as we can that swisspeace is able to play the matchmaker in these kinds of terrible crisis situations.
I think that this is a very important initiative. When we think about archives in not a typical situation. It's really important to have a platform that would help not only to accept, to receive your archives, but also match you with someone who would be able to receive your archives. Also can help you to introduce the right procedure, to minimize risks, to provide consultation what to do with archives in case of danger. So I was very much interested in Margarita's description of the type of documents they have documenting the Georgian-Abkhazian conflict, because in the Memorial Archive, we also have some documents connected to that conflict. Well, I think archives at risk also could exchange information, or for example, some digital copies of documents, thanks to your initiative, and this way to enrich their collection. Thank you.
I was very much interested to listen to the presentation about the archive and how it's built and what the opportunities are. Actually, I have questions, but rather than ask them here, I will go to the website, we'll check some, and maybe we'll be in contact with Trudy and with Esther about it. But I just am happy to hear that somebody takes care about this vulnerable situation we are in. It's very, very, it warmed me to know that there are people and organizations that also worry about what we worry here in our remote part of the world. Nobody is interested in, because we have sometimes such feeling. So it's thank you for developing it. And I had a short time to check the Russian version, and it's important as well for our particular archive, because all the entire Abkhaz part of it, it is in Russian. So we have the materials, the documents and video recordings, and it's in Georgian, from Georgian side mostly, but from Abkhaz side, we have just a couple of them in Abkhaz language, but mostly Russian. And it means that we subtitle whatever we can and do transcripts at least for all the interviews, and we do it translated into Georgian language. And Russian, the opportunity of Russian language that you would provide, because we need to go first into it's valuable. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you. Thank you to Trudy and to Alexei and to Margarita also for these closing words. And yes, we are so glad that you could join us today and that you were able to share your experiences and also your challenges. And please do reach out, and please do help us to disseminate this initiative also in the region, so that more people can know about it. And yes, Alexei and Margarita, we wish you, of course, all the best in your work with your archives. Also to you, Trudy, and thank you again. It was very impressive to hear from you, and so interesting to hear from the ground what's happening also in this very challenging times. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. It was very interesting and useful. As always, it's not enough time.
As always, yes, yeah. But it's a good sign. And we do want to discuss more about this. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank our interpreter, Alexandra, for your work today. Alexandra, it's very much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who participated in this session. Please feel free to check the website, to go through the resources, and to reach out to us should you have any questions about it. And yes, thank you very much for joining today, and have a nice rest of the afternoon. And do svidaniya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.